Hello, everyone. Welcome to our fifth meeting of the quarter. Dara is going to be continuing off of last week by going over hair cloth simulation. So, Dara, whenever you're ready, feel free to take it away.
Yeah, I will.
Should I share my screen for the presentation, or are you going to do that?
I think I have it covered.
Okay,
probably.
cool.
All right. Sharing the screen. All right. Can everyone see this? Is it still loading? This is a pretty static presentation, so we're good? We're Gucci?
Hell yeah, everything's great.
Okay, cool. Hi. So I'm just gonna do a little intro to cloth simulation and cloth, just kind of go over the basics of that. So just NCloth overview, it's the tool that you use to create a dynamic cloth simulation on a polygonal object in Maya. And you can do this through the FX menu, NCloth, and then create NCloth. And so when you create this NCloth object, you create a Maya nucleus system of nodes, which I'll go a little bit more in depth about, and then an NCloth handle. And of course, whenever you're dealing with simulation, just make sure you have a separate saved file with your setup, because in the past there wasn't really a clean way to remove your NCloth, so it's better to be able to start over from a clean setup file, install file. So be careful when you're working with simulation. And then to jump into it, kind of the overall pipeline for working with NCloth is that you want to create your cloth and then, of course, turn that into NCloth. And you can kind of directly do that on your geometry, but you can also create a sim cage, quote unquote, simulation cage that can be used for NCloth, and then kind of blend, a method of using a wrap, deformer, and blend shapes to attach it to your render mesh so that your actual model is clean from the simulation. So you're doing, you would do a simulation on a separate object, which would be attached to your final render mesh. And whenever you're dealing with NCloth, you probably want to make any of your applicable character models or objects into a passive collider, anything that would collide into your NCloth, touch it, etc. And if necessary, you could constrain the NCloth to itself or to other objects, depending on what's needed for your specific simulation. And then the juiciest part of the process of simulation is adjusting all the properties of NCloth. This is where all of your time will be spent. And then some optional things is that you can, of course, in the effects menu with NCloth, you can create external dynamic forces to influence the behavior of your cloth using some fields and solvers, for example, and maybe create some wind or some turbulence or anything like that to affect how your cloth is being simulated. And then another optional thing that can be a part of your workflow is caching your NCloth. You can use Ncache to store your simulation when doing playbacks, so that it's not always calculating when you're running the sim. And also, when you're finished simulating, you can also cache out the geometry as an alembic, which I find has been optimal for rendering purposes. And so this is kind of the overarching NCloth pipeline and just going through those steps. So kind of talking about the different parts of NCloth itself. Whenever you make NCloth, you're you'll get like a nucleus solver. And so the nucleus is like a general solver node for like for the object with enclave and like end particles. And it essentially contains like all the internal forces that drives the enclave. So it has, it like deals with kind of like the gravity, the time, the scaling, like any of those things that would kind of drive the simulation itself. And this is essentially the first thing that you want to edit always. You'll tend to come to this phase and edit those settings so that you can start off with like a proper simulation. And the main things that I've like played around with when working with a nucleus solver is like these 4 things. So substeps, which I've talked about these things last week, but I'll talk about them again. Substeps, which is like the number of times the nucleus calculates per frames. So it's you always end up increasing your substeps and also your max collision iterations. With substeps, I find that you'll tend to increase your substeps when you're doing like any fast movements, and like it requires like quick collisions. So you need like more calculation in between like these collisions and like when it's moving fast. So yeah. And then with max collision iterations, it is the max number of collision iterations per simulation step. And so increasing it would increase the accuracy of the simulation. And of course, when you increase both of these attributes, your simulation time will be slower because it'll take more time to calculate the simulation. And then the 2 things that you're definitely going to change off the bat is your start frame. So this is the frame in which the simulation should start. Your default is going to be at like frame 1, but so this is important if you are going to start your simulation before or after this frame. I've had times where like I start from like a rest pose that blends into the animation and then you want to do like the simulation on that animation, but you kind of need like the clothes start at a rest pose and then it blends into that animation. So then I would have my start frame be before 1 so that it has time to blend into that animation. So I've had previously changed my start frame to like a negative number in the past. And then space scale, which is your relative space scale solver, and it applies forces based on what Maya sees as the object's actual size. You'll also end up changing this in the beginning. Like this is one of the first things that you want to like tweak because it pretty much determines like the forces on your simulation, like kind of in a sense like gravity. And this is kind of based off of like the actual sizing of the object. So moving on from the nucleus, talking about enclave itself, this is the node that controls your actual clothing simulation. And it contains like all the properties you need to tweak the simulation. So here you can like edit the collision property values and adjust the basic behavior of your enclave. So I've tended to mess around with like the collision flags and the solver thicknesses. So essentially adjusting like how thick the cloth is and like how it interacts with other objects that's part of the dynamics. So like any other cloth objects or any other passive colliders. So how it interacts with that and like how much space there is, the thickness to like kind of brush against those things. Another thing that you also tend to play around with is like bounce, friction, and stickiness, most importantly being friction. You don't really tend to touch the other 2, but friction is the thing that you touch as it will like resist any motion between what it's colliding against. And then you can also edit the dynamic properties and these dynamic properties would override the settings of the nucleus. So in these settings, the three things that you're going to definitely touch are the stretch resistance, the compression resistance, and the bend resistance. Three of these attributes would increase or decrease the amount of like resistance on each of these things. So like with stretching, like increasing the stretch resistance will help it like stretch a little less under tension. And stretching is like when the cloth is kind of like moving outwards from itself, and then compression is when it's moving like inwards. And then as for bend resistance, it's like when you increase the bend resistance, it would increase like the bend stiffness, so it bends less between like these vertices, the links between the vertices. And then like other useful attributes that you also tend to touch too would be like lift, drag, damp, and stretch damp. Each of these attributes would kind of control how the simulation works. And as previously stated, like you want to touch your nucleus phase before you get around to the enclave, because the settings of the enclave kind of determine how your simulation works. So if you touch your settings on your nucleus and then start like playing around with the enclave settings, and then you're like, wait, something's kind of off in the nucleus, and so you change your settings in your nucleus, that's going to affect what you did on your enclave settings. So you might have to end up tweaking your settings again based off of what you changed in the nucleus. And then another thing to talk about when it comes to enclave is the end rigid. This is kind of like more of an optional thing if you need that, but you probably tend to create passive colliders for your simulation. So essentially, this is the dynamic object that your enclave object will collide into. And a lot of times this is, for example, like the character under the clothes for a simulation. So within the nRigid shape node, you'll most likely be tweaking the collision settings in it. So for example, you would be tweaking like the collision thickness, which kind of deals with the distance between like the cloth and the rigid. And then like the collision flag, which is often changed to like face mode, and it allows for like more accurate collisions as it's calculating kind of like more of the full surface as opposed to like vertices. And then like friction is another big one that you would kind of change, where it determines how much the passive object resists motion from the collision of like enclave or other objects. And then kind of with enclave, like despite the name enclave, it can be used in multiple applications of simulation, and you can basically use it to your heart's desire. So it's not exclusive to clothing. You can use it to make like putty, rubber, metal, like soft metal or something, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not like exclusive to like clothing simulation. You just use it for like any type of simulation that you need. And creating these different types of simulation is dependent on like your models and tweaking the properties of enclave to fit like the simulation that you want. So you'll end up tweaking like all of those attributes that I talked about to get like that stiffness of the material that you want, or like the flexibility, et cetera, et cetera. And then some like tips and tricks for enclave that I like kind of realized while working around with it. So the simulation itself doesn't really like play back in real time. Like you'll have playback set to real time, but it just calculates very, very slowly. So it's really hard to like to watch the simulation in Maya. So my workflow for simulation is just essentially just play blasting each pass and seeing what the simulation needs, what settings to tweak based off of like each play blast, because you want to see the motion happening in real time. And then, of course, NCLOF is better with good topology and higher resolution polygonal meshes. So when it's higher res, you're going to have way more like high quality simulation because of like the amount of vertices that it can work with. But of course, that will be like higher calculation time. So your simulation will probably run slower. And this might go without saying, but like try not to change the topology of your NCLOF objects while simulating, or else that might result in like collision failures. And similar to deformers and skin weights, you can also paint maps for certain attributes of NCLOF. So that can be very useful for multiple applications. So for example, if you're like simulating a shirt, and you want friction to be applied only around like the collar, because you don't want the collar to move as much, but you want the rest of the shirt to be like really flowy or something. You could paint like a map for friction and have it be like at like a high value around the collar and then way less like throughout the rest of the shirt. So yeah, those are kind of my overall like ways to handle and deal with NCLOF. And so that's kind of it for the presentation itself. We can do like a quick little demo to kind of demonstrate how to go about doing simulation in Maya. But any questions or comments, or has anyone ever worked with NCLOF and found like some really cool, useful applications out of it?
I actually do have a quick thing that I made with NCLOF a while back. I used it to make a jellyfish tentacle, and that came out pretty cool. Hang on, I'll pull up my render for it, and I can share my screen in a second.
Oh yeah, that would be cool. I'll stop sharing.
Still finding it. All right, yeah, let's see. Forgot how to share my screen. There we go. Can you see the jellyfish?
Yes.
Yes. Ooh, juicy.
Yeah, so NCLOF can also just be used for still images like this one. Just have fun with it. Put it in a little fish tank. But yeah, so there's that.
Yeah, that's really sick. Any other like questions or comments, or like just like discussion about NCLOF and like using it?
I was wondering if you could talk more about using Ncache to like you said to use Ncache to like save the simulations.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you could talk about that more. I was like a little confused because I've never used it before.
Right. I'm gonna also be very honest, and I think I've only used it like once, because I just ended up throughout my like learning simulation, I just ended up play blasting like all the time, and then just watching the play blast for like watching the simulation. But like you can incorporate Ncache into your workflow and use that as an efficient process. And so in the effects menu for there's like a separate thing called Ncache, and in it you can create a new cache on like N object, anything with simulation. And then, so what that will do is that'll run through the simulation and kind of cache it out. And then so with that, you'll be able to like play back the simulation actually like in real time within Maya, because it already went through and like saved that simulation. And you can just like, and with that, that's kind of like a way to watch your simulation in real time. Another handy thing about like using Ncache is that you can like, if you see specific frames that are just like, oh, this is kind of funky, like I think I need to tweak like the simulation in this like area, you're like able to do that in Ncache, where like if you didn't cache out your simulation, you would have to like play back your simulation again and again to get to that specific frame. Because whenever you're doing simulations, you shouldn't be scrubbing your timeline like at all, because when you're doing simulation, it needs the time to calculate. It just needs time to calculate, so you're not able to like scrub through your timeline at all. But with Ncache, you're able to like scrub through and see exactly where in the simulation like something needs tweaking, so you can go in and like edit that specific frame either in like the properties of Ncloth or like, yeah, pretty much.
I can actually show you some like a quick way to do like a kind of like a messy, but just a quick way to do end caching though, because it does kind of help in some parts.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that'd be great. Thanks.
All right, I'll share my screen again.
Awesome. Go off, Roman.
Yeah, I had to do a bunch of this for that jellyfish because it took forever to get like just the perfect thing for it.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we'll make this like a piece of cloth that kind of falls down. But yeah, it's really helpful for just like getting like if you're just doing some kind of quick thing for modeling, this is what I usually do. And you can see my screen, right?
Yeah, we can see
Yeah,
it.
we can see it.
All right. So I'll just create a passive color for that. I'll turn this into a cloth. And so pretty much what you're going to want to do if you're going to want to cache something. So right now this is uncached. So you're going to click this, and then you're going to go up here to end cache, create new cache, and do like the little square on the end object. Now what I did is I actually set up a whole folder just for my my Maya cache, because it's kind of like, you know, if I did it like over and over, and like it would go to like kind of like the directory for whatever scene that was. So instead of doing that, I just wanted to send them all to this like one stupid folder that would just like clear over and over again, because these caches will take up a lot of data after a while. So yeah, I just made a folder just for this, and I just delete them every time I'm not using them anymore, really. So yeah, so pretty much I'll do that. Set it to go to that folder, and make sure it's like you have that clicked, and you know, just follow these settings and then create. And let's see, replace existing, and once it kind of goes through once, you should be able to move wherever. You can even scrub if you want. It's kind of like replay it over and over. Now the one thing about it though is, so let's say I were to change, you know, something with like the whole, let's say I want to make it have some like crazy friction or whatever. Now if I change all these settings, it's not going to do anything different, because what it did is it cached that one bit from like 2 minutes ago where it had like those specific settings. So if you ever go to change a bunch of settings, you need to redo the thing again. So cache, create new cache, an object, make sure it's going to my folder, apply, replace. So now it should be a bit different because I upped the friction.
So to make the cache, you have to set up the simulation first.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay.
Because it's gonna cache what you're wanting to simulate, and that's why it's like you have to click the object that you that is being simulated.
Yeah, it has to be a dynamic object first.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, yeah, so now I have a new cache for when it's more frictiony and the thickness is up. So yeah, it's just a process of just redoing cache over and over and over and getting what you want. That's what I do, at least.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
But yeah, so that's a quick little Encache lesson.
Thank you.
I'm not even in the cloth simulation class. I learned this for prop modeling.
Oh, nice, nice.
Oh, so you're doing
You're
that also
gonna-
to make crumpled balls of paper?
No, this is what I used to make the jellyfish,
Okay,
actually.
fair.
Brennan's only experience with Encloth is
Making-
making crumpled paper.
Yeah, that's literally the only thing I've used it for. I used that same thing on like 2 separate occasions, and it's really dumb.
It's useful for that.
Yeah.
So would anyone like us to go over like anything else or kind of run through a simulation or any thoughts just about Encloth in general?
Other than like Roman's jellyfish, like what other stuff have you guys made with end cloth that's not like clothing related?
Dragon wings.
Hmm.
Okay, I haven't tried it personally, but like that's what you'd also use it for, like webbing
Yeah.
and shit.
Oh,
You
right.
can also use it to simulate crushing metal and stuff like that.
Yeah. Like if you've ever seen like soda can like crushing, like you can definitely use Encloth simulation for that too.
Oh, that's so cool. Okay.
One time I made a pancake. That's it.
That's right, you did make pancakes.
That's fantastic.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Encloth could basically be used for anything that you need simulation for. It's like your go-to for simulation.
Yeah, if you want like a quick like blanket. Actually, I'll just reshare my screen because this is also something I did a while ago.
Yeah, totally. In fact, like as Roman was just about to say, like you don't even really need to use it for a simulation. Like you can just make like props out of Encloth. Like if you just like want a wrinkled blanket out of a plane or something, you can totally do that.
Yeah, so it's like if I wanted just this like if I wanted this plane to be like a blanket or something like that, and it's like I would position it to like be perfect, so it's just kind of it's like all right, this looks good, and then I can pretty much just take the mesh, duplicate it. Oh wait, no, wait, wrong thing. Select. Yeah, do the plane, and then if you just delete the history on it, or why is it not working? I did this ages ago. There we go. All right. Yeah, so it's just take the thing, and then I think it was like, yeah, just duplicate it, I guess. I don't know. It's being weird right now. But yeah, you can just take whatever frame you want. And now this is its own mesh. It's not being simulated by anything. So it's a really quick way to just get like any organic kind of clothy shape. You get like curtains or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And the simulation works better with like a higher res mesh, right?
Yeah, you'll definitely get a higher res simulation if it's higher res because it has more like vertices to calculate. So you'll have like more like wrinkles to work off of.
Yeah, if I like do like a little tiny kind of plane without many, let's see, I'll just kind of, so it's kind of like the way the ink is, it's going to tell like each of the vertices where to go and stuff like that. So if it's just kind of, I can probably actually offset over here so you can see the difference.
Just watch as Roman's machine just chugs.
And so, yeah, there he goes.
Oh, okay, yeah.
You can see how, it's only like the lower res, it's like the lower amount of detail. It's just like a regular kind of model you would make.
This one donk.